One thing I teach in my book that's really important for people to think about is that predators interview you. In other words, they are looking for to determine whether you're going to make a good victim or not. So the interview, in quotations, is their way of testing you to see if you're going to set a boundary and say, hey, back off, or I'm not interested.
Okay.
Or if you're going to giggle and make nine. So your job is to fail the predator interview by being a bad potential victim. So when they make an inappropriate comment, you have to call them on it. You have to say, that's not cool.
Yeah. Or
I'm not interested, or whatever you need to say. And the more boundaries you put up and the more you stand firm in your boundaries, the more likely it is the predator's going to say, I'm not even going to try with this person.
You're listening to the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast. Get unstuck, tell a better story, and have a good answer to the question, what are you doing today? Do this stuff.
I'm so interested in your photojournalism era. Like, were you inactive?
I was active.
Combat photography?
I was combat photographer, but there was no combat period. It was during the Cold War.
Oh, wow.
It was probably before you were born.
Yeah, I've heard about the Cold War.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1977.
Okay, so you were just 5 when I went in. 4 when I went in.
Well, thank you for your service. When I was 5'4", you were doing your thing, so thank you.
That sounds like a very exciting job.
What year were you born?
81.
81, so that's the year I went in. Oh my God, I feel so freaking old.
What branch?
Marine Corps.
Wow.
Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Josh earlier was like, do you think if I get her permission, if I can try and attack her and she can beat me up? And I said, I don't think that's a good idea.
Live on the podcast. Not live, but it'd be fun if I just...
We don't have video, so it would just be a lot of like, oh.
So maybe we...
don't mess with her.
Maybe we should bring the listeners up to speed on why we would even say that. But she has a book, right?
So let me just start by giving you a little bit of info about CJ. She's an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and author, expert in victim advocacy and personal security for women and children. She's given speeches and workshops at national and international events and has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including MSNBC and NPR, and most notably the Guys Who Do Stuff podcast. She was a former roller skating car hop, U.S. Marine photojournalist, and holds an interdisciplinary master's in humanity with an emphasis in human violence from Old Dominion University. And lately, she's the author of The Badass Girl's Guide, Uncommon Strategies to Outwit Predators, which has won numerous awards, including I'm blanking on the name of it.
The Eric Hoffer Award.
The Eric Hoffer Award. That's an independent publishing award,
yes.
Right? Yeah, that's
sure
awesome. And now she's currently working on a book called Confidence Rules for Kids, which is how to talk to your children about danger without scaring them to death. She's named one of the top 100 happy people on the planet, and her personal story of triumph and over adversity has been featured in several books, including bestsellers Happy for No Reason and Be Invincible. And so we're just really excited to talk to you. And your name sounds like a superhero. So we're just going to assume you are the CJ Scarlet. We'll put some superhero music behind it. Today on the show, CJ Scarlet. We appreciate you wearing a cape. I thought that was a bold fashion move.
Yeah, that was a great surprise.
Jumping into a little bit about the Badass Girl's Guide, Uncommon Strategies to Outwit Predators. When did that book come out?
That book came out in late 2017, and I wrote it because I myself have been a victim of crime. I had been molested as a child, and then I was raped when I was a college freshman. And I grappled with the trauma for a decade, and then I took my power back, became an advocate for others who'd been victimized. And I started volunteering at rape crisis and domestic violence shelters. I took over as executive director of a child advocacy center for abused children. I worked as director of victims issues for the North Carolina Attorney General's office. So I was helping crime victims, and it was so rewarding, but it was also a high burnout job, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I got very frustrated dealing with crime after it occurred. And so when I left the Attorney General's office, I became an entrepreneur in the victim technology space.
Okay.
And was asked to write the book back in 2016 and decided to write it because I wanted to do something proactive. I thought if I could teach women and girls how to stand in their power confidently, which is the number one predator repellent is your confidence, then I could teach them how to not be victimized in the first place. So instead of trying to deal with crime and victimization after it happened, I could do something more proactive.
So it's the number one repellent to be confident.
Be confident. Predators are looking for people who clearly are anxious or slumped over or occupied on their cell phone, things like that.
Do you think that's like a almost like a nature thing? Because don't they kind of pick off the weakest in the herd? Is how a lot of animals hunt. So
it's like on the Serengeti, you've got the lion and the antelopes, and they look for the ones that are weakest.
Yeah. When you said that, it made a lot of sense because I'm like, of course, that's a big deal.
Yeah. They actually some people actually interviewed predators who were in jail and asked them to look at videos of people walking down the street and pick the ones they would victimize, and they chose the same people.
Wow.
And they were people who did not look confident, who looked anxious, who looked around suspiciously and fearfully.
Wow. That's a great tip, but also a little creepy.
Yeah.
So if you walk confidently with your head up and your eyes open and you're looking at your environment, and when you see somebody, look them in the eye briefly, nod to acknowledge their presence, let them know you've seen them, and then look away. And I mean, even if you're alone in the street and someone approaches you, look them in the eye briefly.
Yeah.
Say, I see you, I acknowledge you, and then move on.
I remember hearing advice similar to that. I used to, when I was in Minneapolis, I was going to school and I worked the night shift at a drug rehab center called Teen Challenge. And so my shift started at 11. And so I'd walk like 10 city blocks at night to go to work because I didn't want to take my car. Then it was when it was the one that was close. But anywho, and then somebody else gave me some silly advice that I used once that worked for me, but it was essentially like, if somebody's acting weird, out-weird them.
Yeah.
That's really good advice.
And so this happened to me once. I was walking to work and somebody was talking to themselves and just really making me feel weird. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to up the ante here a little bit. And I just started like barking at them like I was a dog. And they went to the other side of the street and I went to work.
Nice.
Oh my God.
So they have a funny story about how they met a super crazy person, but I was just, trying to out crazy them.
Dog.
Yeah. And it's not a scary dog bark if I try to do it. It's like a little wimpy, whiny one.
That's great.
One thing I teach in my book that's really important for people to think about is that predators interview you. In other words, they are looking for to determine whether you're going to make a good victim or not. So the interview, in quotations, is their way of testing you to see if you're going to set a boundary and say, hey, back off, or I'm not interested.
Okay.
Or if you're going to giggle and make nice.
Right.
If they make an inappropriate comment or hurt you or something like
Which
that.
is a big deal. A lot of people, that's their defense mechanism, right?
That's right. Especially women. And so your job is to fail the predator interview by being a bad potential victim. So when they make an inappropriate comment, you have to call them on it. You have to say, that's not cool.
Yeah.
Or I'm not interested, or whatever you need to say. And the more boundaries you put up and the more you stand firm in your boundaries, the more likely it is the predator's going to say, I'm not even going to try with this person.
Move on to the next one.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not, but.
Well, yeah. Oh, hopefully stop forever would be the preferable. Learn the error of your ways and become a decent man and move on with your life. Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that, Joe.
On to the next one. Terrible. Well, so what was going on in your professional career that somebody said you should write this book when it came to the Badass Guide?
I was actually pitching a tech company for a product I had developed for victims of crime. It was so cool. It was called the Tiger Eye Security Sensor, and it was a wearable personal security device that you wore like a piece of jewelry. And when you called out for help, it would automatically turn on, photograph and audio record the perpetrator, send it to a monitoring center like at ADT, where they could talk to the perpetrator and say, this person, the police are on the way, leave this person alone, and scare the perpetrator away while capturing the evidence.
Kind of like a decorative body cam. It wouldn't look like a body cam.
Exactly.
But it would be like, hey, you're being held accountable right now.
Is that what you're wearing right now on the right arm?
No, unfortunately, we weren't able to raise the money to finish the product and get it on the market. Which is, I was really disappointed that we weren't able to do that.
You would have thought that would have had some traction.
Yeah, it's exciting.
It's hard to raise money for software. I mean, for hardware. It's easier to raise it for software.
Oh, okay.
But it was tough.
Maybe you could just make one of them. Joe could make one.
just
it
a
only cost
GoPro.
about $1 million to make the technology. It was so sophisticated.
We're going to need a sponsor for that. Back to that.
Yeah, but I was speaking I was pitching at a conference for women entrepreneurs, and somebody heard me speak, and she recommended that I write the book. And as a former photojournalist, it's very easy for me to write, especially nonfiction. And so I sat down and banged it out and got the book on the market.
Yeah, and your cover's great.
Thanks.
You guys should look it up on
Yes,
Amazon. Just look it up. It's the Badass Girls Guide, and CJ Scarlet is the author. You can check out the cover.
You got to make sure
awesome.
you put CJ Scarlet with one T, because there's a CJ Scarlet with two T's who's also an author, but she writes romance books.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Not you.
She's feeding the machine, and you're keeping it strong. Okay.
There's been an uptick in a lot of like that phrase, badass. I see it all over the bookstore now. It's and it's in a lot of business books, like it's female centric or female empowerment kind of books about that. How did you hook on that terminology?
Well, it's funny because the book title was originally, the working title was something like, I don't know, Learning to Live in a Dangerous World or something. And I was really disappointed with the title. And I was talking to an advisor and said that. And he said, well, what would you name it if you could? And without even thinking of it, I'd never thought of it before. I said, I call it the Badass Girl's Guide. And he said, well, what's stopping you? I was like, nothing.
He's like, that's a good title.
The title of this book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a strong title. It's easy to remember.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. The problem is with the media, sometimes they can use it on the media and sometimes they can't. So sometimes they have to cover the title of the book when they're talking about it.
Well, that just makes you look edgy and cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Censored.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
My book is
talking about the bad. Just a lot of beeping in the episode. Gets your attention. So, what was the going on in your life at the time where you mentioned earlier about you were tired of dealing with the aftermath of it? What was the catalyst that got you thinking, well, I want to start getting into the preventative side and start empowering women too?
Well, I realized, as a former victim myself, as a survivor myself, that there were a lot of behaviors that I engaged in that were not helping me. One was the fact that I was raised to make nice, to make everyone around me feel comfortable, to make everything copacetic. And if anything, if I felt uncomfortable and my intuition started blaring, I would suppress it and actively work to make the person that was setting off my alarms feel okay, feel comfortable. And so if somebody said something inappropriate to me or touched me inappropriately, I would literally make them feel okay about what they just done, trying to normalize the situation. That was my coping mechanism, which is not okay. And one day when I was working at the Attorney General's office, my 8-year-old stepdaughter came to visit me, and I took her to the cafeteria, and there was a blind gentleman named Eddie who worked there. And Eddie was just a darling. And Amy and I walked in. I introduced Amy to Eddie, and I said, Eddie said, well, you sound really sweet. Come give Eddie a hug. And Amy, little 8-year-old Amy, said, no, thank you. I was mortified. I thought, oh my God, Eddie's going to feel so bad about that. And then I thought, wait a minute. She has the right to not hug a complete stranger.
Yeah.
And that 8-year-old child taught me one of the most important lessons of my life, that it was not okay for me to try for myself, to put myself in situations where I was in danger, and that I needed to trust my intuition, set and maintain my boundaries, and then act on them.
Wow.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Is that in the book?
Yeah, it is.
Love it.
So a little bit more about the, if you would, we find in these interviews that a lot of times there is a why that drives people that get a lot of stuff done, like you, an entrepreneur, a book writer. Now you're writing another book that I really am excited to talk about because I got young kids. And what do you think is the main why that drives you to do what you do?
I think it's the fact that growing up as a victim of child abuse, I felt a lot of shame. I felt a lot of guilt. I felt I had a lot of depression. And I chose early on in my childhood to recognize that things could be better, but only if I did something proactive to make it better. And that's pretty amazing because I was 4 years old when I made that decision. I had a vision. I just gotten in trouble for something. I gotten spanked. I was upset. I was like, I'm tired of this crap. I want to leave. And then I had this vision. And in the vision, basically, I learned that if I could just hang in there, I'd get to go to Disneyland one day. If I could just hang in there, I'd get to be an adult, and I would be the one making the decisions and being in charge. And so that really started driving me to take the situations that were happening to me, the molestations, and roll with them, kind of take them in stride and do whatever I could to overcome them. So people who are victimized tend to have different reactions. They may become a perpetrator themselves. They may curl up into a ball and remain in their victim thinking for the rest of their lives, or a lot of them bounce back. We take the obstacles that are thrown our way and we turn them into opportunities, or struggles into stepping stones. I mean, there's a million ways to say it, but we take the things that happen to us and we turn them into rocket fuel to propel us into success.
Right.
And so I feel like I've always been driven. I've always believed that things that were happening to me were not fair and weren't meant to be, and that I could do something about it. And that feeling that I had some sort of control enabled me to make choices in my life that served me today still.
In these books where your life story was featured, and it's talking about how you got this story about overcoming and triumph. Do you know, can you pinpoint a time? Was it like a specific time, or was it a years where it just felt like I was in the situation where I was enduring, and then the light switch went off and it's like, now I've overcome?
I had a very specific situation. In 1990, I was diagnosed with lupus and scleroderma, which are autoimmune diseases. And I was debilitated off and on over the years. But by 1999, I became very ill and completely debilitated. I had to go up and down the stairs on my hands and knees. I couldn't hold a coffee cup. I couldn't turn a doorknob. I was 125 pounds heavier because I was on massive doses of steroids. And so I was miserable. And I found out in 2002 that my heart was failing, that I was going to die at any time. They'd give me a terminal prognosis. And I was terrified. I had all these wild dreams that I was sucked into tornadoes, I was stabbed, I was shot, I was choked by this dark man who was coming to kill me in all these dreams. I remember one dream, I was driving a car and it flew off a cliff and I landed hard on the ground, and I thought, well, this is a dream. I can't die in a dream. And I saw something flutter slowly to the ground, and I reached over and I picked it up, and it was a death certificate. My mind was trying to wrap itself around the idea that I was facing death. And I reached, I was so consumed by my own suffering that I forgot that everybody's fighting a hard battle. But I had the opportunity to meet privately with a Tibetan Buddhist Lama in 2004. And I hobbled up to the Lama's house and I made a pitiful bow and I burst into tears and I poured out my tale of woe and I waited for him to shower me with sympathy. Yeah. And that's when I learned that Lamas don't do dramas. Because the Lama kindly but sternly said, stop feeling sorry for yourself and start thinking about the happiness of other people. And I was offended. He was telling me I shouldn't feel sorry for myself. And I argued with him, which you also don't do with a Lama. And he insisted, stop feeling sorry for yourself and start thinking about the happiness of other people. So on the way home, I'm thinking, what can I possibly do in my debilitated state? When an ambulance flew by with a siren blaring, and I said a quick wish for the person inside that they would find help and healing. And I thought, well, that was simple. I can do that. So I started sending good wishes to the drivers around me. I started letting the mom with the crying baby go ahead of me in line at the grocery store, leaving the better handicapped spot, and I felt happier. And so I started to do daily acts of kindness. I gave my cane to a woman who was struggling to walk and left inspirational notes on the driver's side door at the cancer center and volunteered at the Red Cross after Hurricane Katrina, and I felt better. And I reached a point where I was so filled with joy that it no longer mattered whether I was sick or well or even living or dying. I was content. And at that point, my condition went into remission, all within 18 months.
Wow.
And the big lesson out of that was that I realized that even though I had accomplished all these things up to my 30s, I still had a very strong victim mentality. And taking myself out of my own suffering and focusing on the needs of others eliminated that.
Yeah.
It let me know that I didn't need to be the victim of life, that I had control, that I chose my reality. Yeah. And that I could choose to benefit others, and that the payoff is huge when you do that.
Oh, that's awesome. I've heard so many times an analogy similar to the one you just said, but it's the enemy is usually selfishness, like getting outside of yourself. But I think victim is a very enlightening way to think about that thing, because it's very, a victim is thinking about themselves and what's happening to themselves. And I think it's a very strong synonym for that same principle. Like, you don't need to be a victim. You can help other people. And then that takes you from victim to hero. I love that idea too, that it didn't just happen like in a week. It was 18 months.
Yeah.
Because it takes a while to break a mentality. And it probably started out like, I would imagine, I know how I am. It would be like little moments of self-doubt, like, great job. You sent somebody well wishes in an ambulance. You're great now. But you do something long enough and repeat it enough, you start seeing yourself as this new person, because you are. It's not just that's why I asked the question, because I was wondering actually length. So like, how long did it take acting a certain way before it clicked and you were like, well, now I am not the victim. I am how do you view yourself now? Like, what's the
Oh my God, I am a total badass. Actually on my badass. That's actually on my business card. Total badass is my title on my business card. And I feel like that. I feel like I am completely in charge of my life. I choose what happens next. I mean, life will happen to me, things will happen to me, but I have 100% control over how I react to it. Imagine you're walking down a street and suddenly someone shoves you to the ground and you're bruised and battered and your hands are scraped and you look up at them and you're like so upset and angry with them. And then you realize they just shoved you out of the path of a speeding car and saved your life. Suddenly you're filled with gratitude and you appreciate this person and you even love this person. The exact same thing happened. You had two totally opposite reactions depending on what, how you perceive the situation.
Right.
And life is like that. We can perceive my illnesses or my molestations or whatever as tragedies and traumas and terrible things that happened to me, and I could curl up into a ball and just wait for the end.
Yeah.
Or I can see them as opportunities to tap into my courage and my resilience. Right. And use them as ways to be the voice for other people who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
And so it became the driver for me, and it became the opportunity of my life that gives me purpose.
That's awesome. I really want to talk about the new book that you're working on right now. What's the title of it?
I'm kind of going back and forth with the title. Right now it's called Confidence Rules for Kids, How to Talk to Your Kids About Danger Without Scaring Them to Death. But I also like raising safe, savvy kids, safe, savvy kids. So I'm going to do a Facebook contest and see who likes which title best.
Yeah, I like the first one.
I like the first one.
Confidence Rules for Kids?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I like the description of what Confidence Rules for Kids is. Because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is like, what age, because I'm assuming you're deep into research and you've been interviewing people, and the whole like loss of innocence thing, like how to help them understand this without scaring them to death. Like, as I imagine when my kids were a little younger, like now they're 12 and 14. And so these conversations don't seem as difficult to have as when they were 8 or 6, when they needed the conversation. But at a certain point, when you tell a child something as hard to hear as like some men are predators and they're looking at you to do bad stuff to you, you've now lifted a veil of childhood that you can't pull back down again.
And my book starts, my book is for kids 2 to 22. So the book is written for parents as a guide, a manual.
Right.
To help them understand how to talk to their children about danger, about bullying and sexual assault and molestation and kidnapping and human trafficking and all those horrible things in a way that's age appropriate and that puts it into perspective for the child. So I start out in the beginning putting things into perspective for parents, because the media will convince you, CISI and SUV, victim SUV and all that other stuff, SVU, will convince you that people are being murdered and raped and tortured and kidnapped and children
once an episode.
Yes. I mean, it's just crazy. And even I was under the impression when I would see the National Missing and Exploited Children website that 800,000 children are missing and exploited. It was horrifying. I was terrified for my grandchildren because I have twin 4-year-olds and a 2-year-old grandchild. And then I started doing the research, and actually only about 100 children are taken in stereotypical kidnappings a year by strangers.
In America.
Only about 100. The rest are runaways or people who are taken by parents, abducted by parents.
Right.
Or relatives or things like that. And 100 is way too many. I mean, I'm not saying that the number's not significant, but it's not 800,000.
Right. So it's like 800 that like some stranger grabs you off the street, worst case scenario, walking around in Disney World, your kid's gone.
Yes.
The rest of them are more believable scenarios where it's a marriage gone bad or
custody dispute.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. And in fact, only about 99.5% of people will never be the victim of a violent crime. Never. Right. 99.5%. And so I give the parents these numbers. I tell them the big stats first, that half of all children will be abused or assaulted in their lifetime, which is about 1 billion kids a year in the world. Scary. And then I take it down to the more concrete level and say, well, how realistic is it that your child will actually be victimized?
Right.
And the numbers are very, very small. And you can make it 0 or near 0 by doing these particular things. And so the book, I lay out who the threats are. So you've got for the different age groups. So for toddlers and babies, you've got babysitters, you've got relatives, you've got older kids, and all the way on up till the kids are 22 and in college. And then you've got coaches and you've got professors and you've got peers. And I break things down according to the type of behavior. So I cover molestation and child abuse and sexual assault and trafficking, bullying, cyberbullying, things like that. And then at the end of the book, I actually have it. So for 2 to 4-year-olds, here's how you have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
for 5 to 8 year olds.
Like
Here's how
very
you have a
practical,
conversation.
like
Very
even
practical.
like some starter sentences kind of stuff.
And I'm going to be doing a video series that's going to accompany this that will actually have the conversation. So you can watch the video with your child
Right.
and then have a conversation about it. It's kind of be me as Mr. Rogers, me as the badass grandma having a conversation saying, okay, here's how you talk to your kids. And it's not a one-time conversation. These are conversations you need to have throughout your child's life. And so what I'm going to recommend is that you have monthly family meetings. And as part of the family meetings, there's a safety talk. And then there's also ongoing opportunities when your child comes home and says, so-and-so was bullied today. It's like, have you ever been bullied? Has anybody ever said anything mean to you? You take advantage of the situations as they appear, but you also make it a habit.
That's a very effective parenting technique. Instead of like taking the situations when they come up and making them teachable moments, gives it more weight than like just like, sit down, we're going to have a conversation about something random that might not have happened in the last month to your life. I always feel that. And I've seen like, I feel like I've missed some opportunities with my kids when like, oh, that would have been the time to talk about it. When it's fresh on everybody's minds. It was fun. When you're talking about you being like Mr. Rogers, you know how he kind of changes his shirt and puts on shoes.
Sweater
I just imagine like you just putting on like brass knuckles. Now we're going to talk about.
That's a great idea, actually.
With some sweet music playing. It's
because
a
I will
lovely
be
day in the neighborhood, but I'll mess you up if you mess with me.
I'll also be talking about how your child can fight back if they have to. A lot of kids, self-defense classes and martial arts training is great, but you have to do it over and over and over and over again to become proficient at it. And most people are never going to do that. So I teach people how to release their inner Tasmanian devil and basically go bonkers on the predator's ass. You just go insane. You bite, kick, scratch, gouge, twist, pinch, scratch, do everything you can to get away. And if you are a hot mess of fists and feet and fangs, the predator is going to be shocked and surprised. And if you're yelling at the same time, they don't want anybody to see them. They don't want to be caught. So they're likely to. And
you said to get away. So it's not like MMA. You're not trying to get them tap out. You're trying to get them to leave and then you leave.
Yes. You're trying to get away as much as possible. And 84% of the time, people who fought back were able to get away.
Yeah.
Now sometimes you have to comply because and only the person in a situation can determine what is necessary for them, what the best choice is for them. But sometimes they've got a gun pointing at your head. Although I will say that if they try to take you to another location, get in my car or get in this alley or whatever, you've got to fight for your life because the outcome probably will not be good at that point.
So you're in that case, it's likely you're fighting for your life. You should do it now before then.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you going to include, have you thought about including any portion of your book? Like Josh mentioned earlier, it was pre-show. I don't think it was in the show about I'm raising a son. Like what are some of the things that you talk to young men about?
I'm working on that right now because my focus over the last 30 years has largely been women and girls. This is a new area for me to cover boys. And it's interesting because in writing the book, I'm switching the genders up as I talk about, so this is happening to your daughter, this is happening to your son. And
are there any stats on female predators? Yeah, I've got to imagine, my guess is it's super low.
It is very low. Most of the time it's a male predator. Yeah. There are female predators. You have the teacher who has an inappropriate relationship with a student or something like that. You have a female who might molest a child.
But probably super low.
So low.
Yeah, you hear a news story every once in a while, and it's a news story because it never happens.
Yeah. And people think that boys are not abused at the same rate that girls are, and that's simply not true. There more research is coming in that's showing that while 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 girls are going to be sexually assaulted before they're 18, it's about 1 in 6 with boys. So it's not, boys are being molested and
so that means
abused at a higher rate than we thought.
The men are most likely the abusers in that situation.
Yes. Yeah. It's almost 100% heterosexual males that are doing the abuse.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. It helps, so you can tell your child, for example, if you get lost in Walmart, go find a mother with children, a woman with children.
Right.
And ask her for help. Because if you ask a guy, first of all, you don't know, your chances of having him be a predator are a little higher.
Sure.
But a guy's also likely to say, go talk to the store manager over there and point. A woman is not going to let that child out of her sight until she finds a parent.
Yeah.
And so knowing that it's mostly guys gives you a little bit of an edge because you can be more careful. Is it smart to hire a male babysitter?
Right.
For example, you got to think about these things.
Yeah, I remember that line being on a bunch of sitcoms, like people getting hired as male nannies.
panties.
And it's funny as an idea, but
It's trouble.
yeah, it's potential trouble, I suppose.
No, it's trouble.
It's trouble. Because I was thinking, like, the thought has really, literally, I don't think, ever entered my mind to victimize a woman, and I imagine that's most men. There's this outline thing that you really need to educate people to be aware of. And you mentioned you brought up Southern. What do you think the line is for people? You didn't say Southern, I said Southern, but you said really nice to people and making people feel at ease. And I kind of think of that as Southern charm in a lot of cases. But how do you help people understand, or help a young woman understand, or any woman understand? Like, you can just being a badass to ward off predators is one thing, but you're not mean. Like, when I first met you, it's not like you did any of these tactics to me. Like,
nope.
I wasn't probably sending any signals that were like, punch me in the face. Like, how do you help people understand the difference between, this doesn't mean that you're just now this weird person that doesn't form any relationships at all.
Just be a flat out bitch. I mean,
yeah.
you don't have to do that.
There's a difference between badass and just, yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so I teach people to be as rude as necessary to get the person away from them. And so I used to see girls in bars who would be rude to the guys who were hitting on them and thought they were just bitches.
Yeah.
And then I realized that, they had to get these guys off their back.
That's a good instance, right? Because that's like if somebody's hitting on you and it's unwanted attention, that to me feels like an instance where this is totally appropriate behavior. Like you should be as mean as you need to be to get the person.
But there's a lot of space in between being overly nice and being absolutely a bitch.
Yeah.
There's a lot of space for, I'm sorry, but you're making me uncomfortable. Please back off.
Because I would think of you as a very sweet person. Like, when we met and we talked, and I don't think
don't mess with my grandkids.
Yeah. I can imagine like
in a second.
There's a switch that goes off and then it's like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. But I think that'd be an important point. I wanted to talk about too. I've read another book, and I don't want to talk about it because I don't like to talk about stuff that I don't think is good. But I read this book that's a popular book on parenting for dads and daughters, and I didn't like it because it just felt like fear mongering. It was all like, this could all happen, and there was no common sense balancing. And I think the way you talked about starting your book with like, these are the real numbers would have changed it for me with that book. Like, even if that would have been in the first chapter, I'd have been like, oh, okay, so now I need to get into this. But it was just doom, gloom, bad.
And those are most of the books that when I've been doing my research, I've read about 40 books that are on
you would
this
know
topic.
the one that I'm talking about, but I would only talk
probably. And so, and most of them are doom and gloom. They put the numbers out there without going a little deeper into the numbers, like the 800,000 missing and exploited children. They put that out there without explaining that most of those are runaways and who are definitely endangered. Right. No doubt about that, but that they're not kids who were kidnapped and snatched and, or in a basement, somebody's basement right now, or lying in a field somewhere. Yeah. And so, there are a lot of authors who have not been responsible on this topic. And I want to make this book the best manual you can possibly find on the subject that a parent can read and go, okay, this is scary stuff, but you know what? It's not as bad as I imagined it was, and I have power and control to be able to do something proactive for my child, to teach them to protect and defend themselves when I'm not around. Right. And so it gives them that confidence, and that child that confidence to be that predator repellent I talked about.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, it's like a lot of things in life. Equipping yourself with a set of tools puts you in a situation where you're better off than you were not having trained or equipped yourself with these tools. What are some of the really practical tips? Like, say you had a teenage girl and you were talking about this topic of, protecting yourself. What are some of the best tips that you would give to a teenage girl?
There's one word that could have saved me virtually every awful traumatic incident I ever experienced, and that word is no. And I was never taught that it was okay for me to say no. And so I didn't know that. When a guy would come on to me and in a way that was making me really uncomfortable, I didn't know it was okay for me to set a boundary and say no. So I would say to every young woman, you have complete choice over when and where you use your body. Mm-hmm. And you have the right.
And if you're my daughters, it's much later than it is now.
Yeah, that's right. Much later, much 20 years from now. But you have the right and responsibility to say no and to make that very clear, because I'm not ever saying that it's a woman's fault if she's raped.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
But if you can be clear about what you mean and convey that to the person you're with, chances are higher that they'll stop. Mm-hmm. And that if they don't, you have done everything you could. And so it builds a stronger criminal case against that person that you with, that you try to repel him.
Yeah. That's good advice.
Yeah. There's another piece of advice from me and CJ that I've got in the book, and that's if for girls, and again, your girls won't be here for another 20 years, but
unfortunately, that's not true.
If you're going to go on a date, if you're going to go on a date and you don't want to have sex, don't shave your legs.
Yeah.
A friend taught me this when I was 19. I was working for the Forest Service as a firefighter, and she said, "Do I shave my legs or don't I shave my legs?" Before we went on a double date, I was like, "Why? What's the deal?" And she said, "Well, I don't know whether I want to have sex with this person or not." I was like, "Wow, that really works because no woman's going to have sex without shaving her legs.
It's like
she's just not going to do it."
It's like the way to help yourself make the decision beforehand.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm not. No, I don't want this.
And then if you get tempted later, you're like, "Oh, damn it, I didn't shave my legs. So I'm not going to have sex with this person."
I've always heard that good piece of advice, like the back seat of the car. It's too late to make the decision.
Yeah.
Like
unless the legs are hairy.
Unless the legs are, then there's a motivator on the side of there's probably not an equivalent for that with guys.
No, probably not.
We just don't have the same kind of personal grooming discipline that women have.
Well, you don't, Joe.
I don't, yeah. I don't know what your personal grooming is, Josh. We've entered into a weird topic. Well, let's talk about it, Josh. I'm just kidding. No. When you were back dealing with the criminal cases, that foundational side, you said you were working with the DA for a while.
The Attorney General.
The Attorney General. What was your role, and what did a day look like for you?
I was a director of victims issues, and it was a really cool job because there was no definition for what I was supposed to do. So they let me do pretty much anything I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So a typical day would be talking with victims of crime and referring to the right resources in their local communities. Sometimes I would get families of murder victims who wanted the cases reopened, and I would do my best to convince people to reopen the cases.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was helping work on legislation to improve the laws to protect victims of crime. The coolest thing I did was that I initiated and co-led the implementation, this is a mouthful, of the nation's first statewide automated victim notification system. Put simply, there is a system called SAVIN in North Carolina where you can sign up to be notified before your perpetrator is released from custody, so you can take precautions.
I've heard that
safety.
in the news. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and
that was you.
That was me.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's been in place for 20 years. I was told by the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court that magical phone system would never be implemented under his watch, and it's been in place for 20 years.
Yeah. When I heard it, I know it was controversial when it came out, but that seems like information that people should know.
Yeah, it seems
it seemed like common sense, and people were fighting against it. And I was like, I don't get the other side of the argument personally.
Yeah, victims' rights is a relatively new thing. Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, victims didn't have the right to give impact statements. They didn't have the right to get notified of the different hearings and things like that. And now those things are codified. They're in the law. So victims are better protected and are able to stay on top of the process and help protect themselves and gives them a little more feeling of control and that justice is in their favor.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell people again, you can purchase this book right now on Amazon, The Badass Girl's Guide, and I recommend you do that. What are some other things that you're doing? Maybe if you're in the Triangle and you're local, it says you're a public speaker. Do you have things coming up?
I just did a speech for the UN Women. I'm going to be doing a national book tour and speaking tour for Confidence Rules for Kids. And
that's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Did you get to do a national book tour for your last book?
I didn't do a national book tour for the last book. I did a local book launch, which was so much fun. We had a great time with that.
Well, this has got to be like that times like a million, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to be working with a major national sponsor as their spokesperson coming up. And I can't mention the sponsor yet, but I'll be all over the country and maybe in some commercials and promoting the book, and they'll be helping market the book to their
maybe get to do
7 million customers.
Maybe do a media junket. You get to be on some shows.
I will definitely be doing the morning shows and some national media.
That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it is. Because this book, there's nothing like this book out there. And that's one of the challenges with doing the research is I'm not finding precedents for what I'm trying to accomplish and convey in this book. But that's also good because that means that I'm the first to really get this information out there in this way. It's very timely. It's very proactive and hopeful. It makes people feel hopeful when they read it. Like I can do something to help my child instead of feeling paralyzed.
Right.
And so I think it's going to get a really good response in the national media.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that's you and you're just like one of those people that want to stick your head in the sand and feel like there's way too much bad stuff going on, I don't even want to mess with it. The path out of that is to educate yourself about it and learn these principles and techniques and teach them. And it really will have that kind of lifting effect of being like, oh, it's going to feel hopeful, which it should. It doesn't sound like it should, but I can totally see how it would.
Yeah. You have just said something so important, that the antidote to paralysis and hopelessness.
It happens on accident to me a lot.
Action and activity. It does.
Yeah. I say important stuff on accident, never on purpose. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
That was very profound. Yeah, that's really important. When you look at your child and you're laying there in bed at night because they haven't come home yet, and you're terrified and you're imagining every awful scenario that's out there, or you're sending your 8-year-old to school and you know that there's bullying going on and your child's showing symptoms that maybe something's wrong and you don't know what to say or do, you have so much power in the situation. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to talk to your child in a way that's at your child's level, whether they have a nonverbal learning disability or they're at the regular age group, and make you feel confident that you can protect your child and that they can protect, you're teaching them to protect themselves when you're not around.
Yeah.
And there's so much peace of mind that comes with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of in those same situations, instead of being worried as a parent that your child isn't home yet, you can have at least the confidence knowing that they know what to do if something bad has happened, that they're going to.
And I'm not going to be real popular with teenagers because I'm recommending that, electronics are privileges. They are not rights.
Yeah.
And the parents have the right to monitor and let the child know that their content's being monitored, their social media is being monitored. Yeah. It's a scary, scary world out there when it comes to the cyberbullying and the online predation.
I know
you need to keep your child safe.
My daughters won't appreciate hearing this, but I'm totally on that side. Like, we didn't have, when I was young, there was no idea that like, this is private, mom and dad. You can't dare come into my space and look at what's going on. But for some reason, there's this notion floating around that phones are private and that they are off limits for parents.
A shocking number of teenagers are sending pictures of themselves to other people, and they can literally be charged with a federal crime.
See, that's so important. I don't think people talk about that enough. Like, people think of like sexting. It's a bad idea. It's an illegal thing.
Yeah. And if they're a minor, it can be considered child pornography.
Right.
They can literally be charged with a federal crime for sending a picture of their own body to someone else.
To another minor.
Either
way, just sending that out is really.
And 12 and 13-year-olds have been convicted, charged and convicted of child pornography for doing just that.
Wow.
One, because the whole act is wrong and it should be illegal. But two, like, images that you take, they show up.
And they stay out there forever.
Because your pictures are instantly uploaded to the cloud.
That's right. And the cloud is not just a cloud. Remember, it's somebody else's computer.
Yes. It's not a cloud.
And you don't know what they're doing
there.
with that. You don't know what they're doing. I mean, I was joking earlier that if Facebook and Girls Gone Wild had been around when I was a teenager, my boobs would be all over the internet right now.
Yeah.
That is true. It's 100% true. You need to teach your kids that, again, you're monitoring their social media and their phones and stuff like that. And if you find pictures of them, inappropriate pictures of them, that's a hammerable offense, meaning you will take their cell phone and you will smash it to smithereens. That there are certain things that, you're going to get your phone taken away for 2 weeks or whatever, but there are some that are hammerable offenses where you simply say, you just lost your right and privilege to this technology forever because you did something so inappropriate that I can't trust you.
Do you think that will ever change? Because now there's all this talk about like the internet being a basic human right. Do you think at some point there might be legislation that put that at risk?
I hope
you
not.
Can't dare take somebody's internet away.
Yeah, I hope that they don't have legislation, that takes your internet away and monitors it and stuff like that. But people do things online they would never do in person.
Right.
It provides a level of anonymity and you can hide behind it. And people say and do the most god-awful things.
People think they can hide behind it. Like with any amount of digging in the appropriate forensic software, like you can be found out. But like the majority of the time, if you say something mean on Facebook from a fake account, they're not going to go through the effort to find you, but they totally could if they wanted to go through the effort and talk to the right people. What are some of the tips and tricks you give people when it comes to cyberbullying? Because you can't really exude confidence the way you were talking about, like if you're walking down the street, or can you from your social media profile?
Really, the only tool you have in social media profile is to ignore and delete and take yourself away from it, take a vacation from it. I actually was helping.
Does reporting help?
Reporting can help, but it's really difficult. It is, I know that with a lot of digging, you can ultimately find who's responsible. Not always, but most of the time you can find who's responsible, especially when it's stupid teenagers doing stupid kid stuff. But I've been working with a mom and her daughter, and the daughter was being cyberbullied and encouraged to kill herself. Because her boyfriend, she broke up with her boyfriend, he was upset. And so he started spreading these rumors that she was a slut and all these other terrible things were happening. And all the kids glommed onto it and started cyberbullying this poor girl. And the school's attitude was, well, just tell her not to look at her social media.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Yeah, great advice.
Yeah.
How do you stop that? They were sending her Snapchats that disappear almost instantaneously, telling her to kill herself. And she doesn't know who's sending her these messages. And so how do you combat something like that? And part of it is to change your social media accounts and do things like that. But once kids are, I'm just going to say it because this is you said this is explicit, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Kids can be assholes.
Yeah.
You know, they really can. They're terrible to each other. And
that's not news to anybody that's been a kid.
No.
Yeah.
You know, but they can be terrible to each other. And they do get this group mentality, these teenagers. And when a rumor goes around about somebody, they can jump onto the pack, you know, pile on the rabbit. And then suddenly that person is ostracized and harassed.
Right.
And the kids are literally committing suicide because the harassment has gotten so bad. Worst thing we were worried about when I was a teenager was somebody a fist fight behind the Agri building.
Right.
You know?
And most fist fights for guys, like, I don't know what it was like for you, but then those guys became friends. It's like, now we got it out of the system.
Yeah.
All right, you want to sit together lunch tomorrow? Great, you know.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that bullies are people who don't have self-esteem and who are secretly, or, you know, that they secretly are insecure and all this other stuff. And that's true in some cases, but there are a lot of very confident, entitled people who are bullies. And girls, they don't picture girls as being bullies, but when it comes to the cyberbullying, girls can be vicious.
Yeah.
They will decide a girl who doesn't go along with them or feed their ego or whatever is suddenly the enemy. They can turn the entire school against this one poor child. And she has almost no recourse.
Yeah.
Now, there are legal things you can do, and you can get restraining orders, and you can send letters of cease and desist, which can help. And you can get engaged in a civil suit if you can't do something criminally. And so there are some tools you have that I'll talk about in the book.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a whole kind of new frontier of weirdness. Because like we all grew up with bullies, and there's an element to a bully that is fed by, like, when you come up with a good cut down for somebody, or you feel like you really minimize somebody, that you feel like, I doubt it actually happens, but people are looking at you like, oh, that person's cool. And so you got to imagine that a lot of that happens online. Like when somebody's bullying somebody, they want it to be public and seen by their friends so they can have them jump on and be like, oh, good one.
They get validated for it. And
they get some kind of validation out of it. And kids are on social media. I mean, it's not like a stick your head in the sand thing. Social media is part of our lives now. How do we train people to make good decisions in this new medium? And I'm glad that somebody's like trying to tackle it and say, here's some principles.
And when as teenagers, all bets are off. Their brains, they're just not right in the head. I mean, their brains have not fully developed yet. They're not cooked.
And I found that doesn't really help me as a parent when I'm like, you got to understand where now your brain's working this way, but I'm telling you, like, if you could fast forward and be 30 and we were having this conversation, you would hear it completely different.
I swear to God, I knew everything when I was 15.
Yeah.
I knew it all. And I knew how to make the right choices for myself. And I was completely wrong. I mean, completely wrong. But I was convinced, and you could not convince me otherwise. Right. And they literally misread people's facial expressions and tones. And when you add the anonymity of the internet to that, where you can easily misread the tone of an email or a tweet, it just amplifies the problem.
Yeah. And I wish that there was a way to help people. I feel like there's this really bad precedent set for parents like myself, or if you have teenagers or even younger kids, that if you see on media and everything, anytime a parent is nosy and looks at somebody's phone, they don't trust them. Well, that's crap. It has nothing to do with me not trusting my kids. I love them, and my job is to protect them and to be there for them. And so when I feel like it might be necessary, my mind is not like, oh, I sure don't trust them. Of course I trust them. They're my kids, you know?
Yeah.
But trust is the wrong thing. But I see
you don't
so
trust
many,
the rest of the world. It's like defensive driving. It's not your kid you're worried about. It's the other idiots on the road you're worried about.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it's not you that I don't trust. It's everybody else. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So any other ways that people can get in touch with you if they wanted to maybe book you as a speaker or see what's coming up on your calendar that we can put in the show notes for people? Absolutely.
I've got a website, www.cjscarlet.com, and that's CJSCARLET, like the color red.
One T.
One T. You go to the second T, lady, and you got a whole different thing.
Although I do have cjscarlet.com with 2 T's also that will forward.
Take that,
so
lady.
Misspell it. Yeah. I got it. Yeah, the poor author with 2 T's doesn't have her own web address. But they can also get me at cj at cjscarlet.com. Yeah. And I'll be happy to talk with them if they're in a situation that they might need a referral somewhere, if they have questions about the book or they want to know how they get the book.
When does the new book come out? Do you know?
February 2020.
Is there a place that they can go to sign up to be like first to know? And
yes, on my website.
Okay, great.
There's a place where they can sign up to get notified.
I think that's going to be an exciting book. You should definitely check it out.
You know what I love about this book is that I feel like I'm helping to change the paradigm for parents so that we can in the future raise new generations of kids who are informed and empowered by parents who are informed and empowered.
Right.
Yeah. And when parents arm their children with knowledge and with real world tactics and tips and tools they can use to protect and defend themselves, kids will apply those. Kids listen to you as a parent more than you realize. And especially if you start them young or you do things like encourage them to talk by giving them a get out of jail free card, which is, if you do something really inappropriate, you're out at a party and you smoke or drink and it's not safe, you can call me at 3:00 in the morning. I'll come get you and we won't have a fight about it.
Yeah.
We'll discuss it calmly the next day. But the way you get your kids to talk to you about things, kids, for example, will get an inappropriate email or message from somebody online, ask them to send a picture of themselves, and they may do it and then realize later it was a mistake if they start getting blackmailed for it, for example. And they're terrified to tell you because they know they did something wrong. If you raise your children to say, when you tell me that this bad thing happened, it makes me trust you more because I know that you're recognizing and using your judgment. And so instead of me saying, well, clearly you did something wrong, you're never going to get to use the internet again, that becomes another teachable moment where you say, wow, I'm so glad you recognize this was wrong. Let's talk about how to keep this from happening again.
Yeah.
And so instead of making it a punitive thing, so your child's terrified to talk to you, they know they come to learn that you are a trusted source who will be reasonable and rational with them.
And help them make sense and get out of the situation that they're in and help them come up with, here's ways to make sure you don't put yourself in that again.
That's huge. Because I hear my 6-year-old always saying, is that bad? Did I mess up? Did I do this? And he's looking for that. So that to know that, encourage him to trust us and that we trust him more. Like wording it that way. I'm proud of you for sharing that with me. I'm not mad. I trust you more.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's a great tactic. Because
thanks for
like I was saying, on the flip side of like, why don't you trust me? Then you also have this, like, it's not really trust, but if you want to build trust, this is how you build trust. You're honest and transparent. There was a couple that we were friends with in Mississippi, and it blew my mind how honest their kids were with them. And they never reacted poorly like you thought they would when they were teenagers and they would do something that is like maybe PG-13 dumb or all the way rated R dumb. It would be like, well, thank you for telling me, and we're going to talk about it. Yeah. And the kids consistently went to their parents and told them stuff.
Yeah. And sometimes your kids will tell you stuff you don't know that you really want to hear. But once you lay that out there, you've got to be as cool with that as with anything else they provide. So when they tell you, well, I lost my virginity last night because they're so comfortable talking to you, you've got to collect yourself and go, oh, okay, well, I'm not ready to talk about that right now. Give me 15 minutes or we'll talk about this tomorrow or whatever. But your child will come to see you as a source of advice and guidance and leadership, rather than this punitive figure that's going to come down on them every time they do something wrong. And the other thing I encourage in the monthly meetings that I'm going to recommend to parents is daily sharing. Yeah. Where instead of just saying, how was school today? I'm going to give them specific questions they can ask that are going to draw their child out and help them recognize when something's going off track early on in the process. But one of those things is, what mistakes did you make today? Let's talk about your failures, because your failures are so important for you to learn.
Right.
And get the child comfortable with the idea of failure and see it as a stepping stone rather than, something they did wrong and that they should never do again. Yeah,
that's fantastic. I think so many people think wrongly that parenting is about raising perfect kids. That's completely stupid.
Nobody's ever done it in history.
Nobody's done it in history. Plus, we would never learn. Like, you would be raising a not interesting human.
Stepford child.
We learn from our mistakes. We learn from the things that we do wrong, and those things are so formative into making us into delightful, fascinating, useful, productive, cool adults. They're in this zone where they get the unconditional love. It doesn't really matter what my kids ever do. They're still my kids.
That's the coolest part about being a grandma, is that I've got perspective of age and wisdom. when you're a parent, you're constantly getting them ready for school and getting them fed and doing their homework and everything. Everything's doing. And it's all a rush, and you're focused on your child is more of a reflection on you. And so you're very aware of how people are perceiving you when you're chewing your child out at Target because they're throwing a temper tantrum. And as a grandparent, it's about being with them, and you see them as their own little individuals, and you want to nurture and encourage them to be who they really are.
Yeah.
And it's a joyous place to be.
It's not a reflection on you anymore. You're like,
that's right.
Grandma.
It's a reflection on mom and dad.
You ever just throw that off and be like, what can you do? Kids, right? My kids, grandkids. The stress is off at the meltdown in Target. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. This was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed talking to you.
You guys are awesome.
Well, thank you.
Oh, because of you, we are awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for
being here. The whole trick to a podcast is we just ask questions, and so people are like, "This was fun." It was like, "This because you were good." We just try to listen and ask a question every once in a while.
Otherwise, we'd just be two idiots sitting in a studio looking at each other.
And that name was taken, so we went with guys who do stuff.
Good choice.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. You guys have a great day.
We love making this stuff for you. You can help us out by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. Get unstuck, tell a better story, and have a good answer to the question, what are you doing today?